let me start off with the question. What do you usually do between 4 o'clock and 4:30 in the afternoon? Anyone? Nap? Yeah, you can take a nap, absolutely. Some of you will be actually falling asleep in a really boring lecture, right? So, some of you will actually try to sneak out of office without being seen. Some of you will planning your dinner, maybe messaging your friends to go out. But in that very half an hour, something else takes place. Every weekday, in that half an hour, about 2/3 of the world's crude oil prices are determined. And that half an hour also lends itself to potential for manipulation. But to understand that, let me take you to the starting point. Do you remember the LIBOR interest rate scandal that has taken place a few years back? Well, around the same time, there was another investigation that started about oil prices. On the morning of 14 May 2013, which I'm sure you vividly remember, the European Commission raided the offices of some of the major oil companies, namely Shell, BP, and Statoil, along with a reporting agency called Platts. For legal reasons, I'm not allowed to use the logos, so the names are there. Within a few days after the raid, the European Commission also asked for further information from a number of other companies as well. They're involved traders and refiners and so on and so forth. Because the European Commission had believed that there were certain irregularities and was trying to identify and try to get this information. But what was going on? Well, before we can talk about what was going on, what did the European Union do as a result? Well, within a few months, by October, the European Union decided to propose a set of regulation. Because if there is a potential for manipulation, let's try to regulate this. But what were we trying to regulate? What was going on that was causing this concern for irregularities in oil price? To understand that, we need to understand how the oil prices are determined. And broadly speaking, well, actually, let me ask first. What is the oil price today? $30. Sorry, I heard 30 and then 36, 40. Okay. Sorry? This is turning into an auction. But just at the end of the day, when I checked, it was $32.85. So, in between you two. But what does that refer to? Which transaction does that refer to? Which contract does that refer to? Where do we get that price from? Well, the chances are, when you hear in the news an oil price, the chances are that's from financial markets, traded in London or New York mainly, when you hear Brent. In fact, the price that I got was Brent from London market. But then there's a physical market, the smelly, gooey stuff that is traded every day. How is that determined, the price? Because the contracts are private. We don't know how much parties agreed to. And to understand that, we need to understand how the value of oil is determined, the physical oil. Broadly speaking, the oil's value depends on 3 things. How sweet or sour it is, how heavy or light it is, and also how much its products, like gasoline, diesel, and so on and so forth, are worth. And when you combine all of these things, you get some value for your crude oil. But what is more interesting is that not every oil is the same. In fact, the production from every field is different, and the quality based on the sweetness and sourness and all these things, different. So, over time, a number of benchmarks have developed so that every new production could set their price based on these benchmarks. Nowadays, we have over 160 benchmarks, just benchmarks, and then every production is based on those values. Great. So we start adding more complexity to this. The European Commission's concern was about the Brent benchmark. And the interesting thing about Brent benchmark, as well as other benchmarks, is the question of who reports these numbers. Where do we get, who actually tells us these numbers that we necessarily see in the newspapers and so on and so forth? Well, in the physical crude market, there are a number of private companies like Platts, Argus, and then some more specialist ones, ICIS, which does more refined products. These private entities then report, and we know what the physical crude oil price is. Okay. Platts is the one that, if you remember, was the subject to investigation. The reason for that was this: Brent market itself covers about 2/3 of all the crude traded daily in the world. The price for Brent is determined about 2/3 of it. 80% of the reporting business, about 80% of the reporting business, is done by one company, Platts. So that's why we're looking at Platts. Okay, but how does Platts come up with this number? What is the methodology? And this is where things get multi-layered. Because first of all, when we talk about Brent, unfortunately there isn't a single Brent. Brent is made up of a complex that involves 4 different complexes put together. Namely the Brent-Ninian blend, your Forties, Augsburg, and Equifax. All of them together. Some of them are produced from the Norwegian side, excuse me. Some of them are produced from the UK side, with different terms and conditions. So we can already start seeing the multi-layered system that's coming in. And then what Platts does is takes the most competitive crude among these 4, which generally is the Forties blend because the quality is marginally lower than the rest. And then that determines the price for that day. How? Well, what Platts does then is takes number of different financial instruments as well as the physical instruments that are being traded that day, and then puts the numbers together in a complex methodology to come up with a figure. So you get things like contract for differences, swaps, options, and then more exotic instruments that come in and all feed into and collect the information. And then finally, Platts comes up with the number and then reports it. But all of this takes place between 4 o'clock and 4:30. Now, traders trade throughout the day. Of course, all day long, the trading takes place. But what happens is, then the traders phone up Platts or sends a text message between 4 o'clock and 4:30 and says, hey, we just concluded a trade at $32.85. And then Platts takes a note. And then once all the information gets in by 4:30, it gets timestamped. And then it goes into the methodology. Now, the allegations is that if the parties are voluntarily sharing this confidential information about the price of their contract, they will voluntarily provide information that will benefit them. So, a company can take a financial position down in London or in New York, and then perhaps do a short but sufficient physical trade that's going to hurt them for the physical trade, so they're going to make a loss, but that will benefit their financial position and make it large sums. And this was the concern. Because then, if that happens, the price is not revealing the actual market price for the oil. It's actually revealing the price that some of the participants would like to have. And to prevent that, European Union proposed regulation. Well, let's think about that for a second. If we try to force the parties to disclose all of their positions, would you ever reveal an information that's going to cause you trouble? No. So any regulatory push, any regulatory stance would make all the actors just not providing information. It would desensitize them. So as a result, what we get is less transparency. Any regulatory approach that is aimed at creating transparency would end up creating further opaqueness in the system. So what is the solution? What are we going to do? Well, I propose that we should do nothing. Absolutely nothing. But what do I mean by nothing? I don't mean that we just sit at home, put our feet up, watch some TV, and let the world go by. No. What I mean by don't do nothing is that regulators, the central decision makers, should do nothing. Let the actors come up with the resolution. I'm proposing this because this isn't the first time that an allegation for manipulation came up. This has been going on for so long. The more famous ones are back in 2000, Arcadia and that is a co-conspirator, Glencore, were allegedly squeezed the brand market. So in very simplest terms, what they've done is Arcadia allegedly bought future and forward positions, so financial instruments, as well as the physical market, while Glencore purchased actual physical crude and took it out of the market for its refineries in India. Well, when the contract expiry time came, Arcadia said, "Excuse me, can I have my oil back? I need this oil." So we have contractual arrangement. Well, all the other contractual parties obviously didn't have the oil because the physical oil was gone with Glencore. So what happened? You had to pay premium. And then Glencore just showed up as hero and said, "Hey, I'm bringing this crude oil back at a premium." And then at that time, you can see that the crude oil actually moved up about a couple of dollars for some time. But the case was settled out of court, so everything is just allegations. Similarly, Semper had a similar brand squeeze in 2002. Again, settled out of court. But the resolution for these manipulations was not new regulations. We don't have new set of regulations that suddenly respond to that. No. The solution to this came from actually Platts itself. Until that point, we only had Brent-Ninian field as determinant. But as the production declined, this manipulation became a lot easier to do. So what Platts did as a reporting agency said, "Hey, I'm going to start introducing 2 other fields," and brought on the basket. And then changed the contractual terms. So that manipulation becomes harder. And then when that production declined further again, they said, "We're going to add another one," and brought it out. And in fact, since the investigation started happening, last summer, the European Union finally said, "You know these regulations that we proposed, we're going to amend them so that they only apply to the LIBOR's issue and not to crude oil. Not crude oil benchmarking." And then last December, just before Christmas, the European Union dropped the investigation into this. The reason for that is, and the reason why all of these issues settle out of court is, it's very, very difficult to prove intent for market manipulation. Because obviously manipulation is illegal, both in this side of the Atlantic and the other side of the Atlantic. But it's almost impossible to prove intent. But what we see here is, reporting agencies like Platts, their entire business is built on having the parties just trusting Platts reporting. Right? The entire business is based on that. If all the actors lose that trust, if they believe that actually these reporting agencies' methodologies are open to manipulation, then these reporting agencies would go out of the business immediately. So trust is their fundamental business. And to keep that, they have to constantly update their methodology. The methodology is out there for everyone to see. It's transparent. But it's complex. It's complex so that the manipulation doesn't take place. The actors in this market are in a better position to not only be able to respond, but also anticipate the changes. Regulators will never be able to be so quick to prevent these actions or respond to them. It will take a long time. So when the regulations do come, they will either be irrelevant or it will be too late. Whereas if you leave to the market actors, they will be able to respond just like that. And the entire underlying thinking of this is, those who create the risks are in the best position to mitigate them. So this is why I propose that we should do nothing. Thank you.